topic 3 also gives us another tool: measurements in the trenches. This is also known as benchmarking. We're in a competitive war with our competitors, right? So the trenches, let's say we go back to World War I and II, well, it's trench warfare. We're trying to gain ground on our competitors, but we have to benchmark where we are, where we want to go, where they are, so we can see how competitive we are and what we need to do to get better. So there's several different types of benchmarking. So we have our competitive benchmarking. We're looking at external companies. If we're a university, we're looking at other universities. If we're Amazon, we're comparing ourselves to Walmart. If we're Walmart, we're probably comparing ourselves to Walmart and Target. But we might be looking at part of our business to one company and part of our business to another company. For example, Walmart has a grocery section and then a retail section. Well, you can't compare the grocery to a company that doesn't have grocery. It doesn't really work. So you might compare grocery part of Walmart to, let's say, Kroger, and then the retail part of Walmart to Target and Amazon. You can also do non-competitive benchmarking. So you can compare yourself to others in your industry. You're not directly competing with them, but you're getting some averages that might be going on in the industry. And then you have internal benchmarking. You can compare yourself to last year, to the year before. See how you're doing. So your biggest challenge is find the right company to help you drive the learning process. When you're trying to find a competitor, you want to try to find somebody who's going to make that's ahead of you, but not too far ahead of you. If you just opened up an online e-commerce store, you don't want to compare yourself to Amazon right out of the gate. You might want to compare yourself to some smaller company. And then maybe in a few years, you might be looking to compare yourself to Amazon. Who knows? But if you're a minnow, don't try to be comparing yourself to that whale. So we have a process. We need to define our goals. We need to document our practice here. And then develop an implementation strategy. So if we can do these 3 things, define, document, and develop, we can definitely make a best practice and we can adopt it. But once we do that, once we set these benchmarks, we need to work towards them. And once we meet them and surpass them, we need to evaluate to see if we're going to go further with it. Who do we compare ourselves to next? Could that be, if we compare ourselves to Walmart, well, let's say we surpass Walmart, who's next? Well, do we go on to Amazon? Or do we go on to Alibaba, compare ourselves there? Do we compare ourselves to Taobao? All these different companies out there. And we don't know. And if we're the benchmark for other companies, that means we need to maintain our progress so they don't catch us. It is a competitive world out there. So we need to make sure that we adopt these benchmarks and we review them every so often and continue them. But we have some pitfalls here. So we can get complacent. Our company's attitude. If we have the attitude that, oh well, we don't have to worry about company A. Well, that might be a problem because our benchmarking might say that, yeah, we are nowhere near where we need to be, but we're not learning from that. We need to learn from evaluating others. How can we do better so we can to meet our benchmarks and then surpass them? And then come our own managers who know how to do the benchmarking. They know their own limits. So how are they going to break through those limits? And then high performing supply chain companies tend to be active benchmarkers. Well, how do they get to be high performing? We need to figure out at what point do we rely on benchmarking, and then at what point do we need to maybe go to the balanced scorecard. These are two different tools that possibly can be used for different purposes. Just like I have said before, when you have a hammer, everything's a nail. Well, don't think that way with these tools. Not everything is a nail when you have a hammer. Total cost of ownership. So, when we're buying something, let's say a piece of equipment, well, we have a lot of things that go with that. And the purchase price is just part of it. As you can see from this upside down triangle, the purchase price is the bottom. But transportation costs. That's how it has to get to us somehow, so there's a cost there. If it's coming from overseas, there's probably some duties, tariffs, taxes, just to get it into the country. But then there might be warehousing at the other end. There might be defective materials, taxes, duties, carrying, factory yield, service, general administration, field failures. And all these things add up to become the total cost of ownership. So as we go up to the top of this upside down triangle, these are more difficult. A field failure is really hard to tie to a specific piece of equipment. Who would know that, because this part failed, that it's tied to this machine? I can tell you that for accounting, it's unlikely to be associated as an expense of that machine. So total cost of ownership is the acquisition cost. That's the actual price of the equipment that we paid for it. And then the net present value. And then we have the sigma, so the total of ownership costs plus disposal divided by scrap costs, or disposal / scrap costs. So essentially, acquisition cost, the upfront cost to get it, what it's going to cost in maintenance, repairs, taxes, because it might be taxed by the local government. All those extra costs with it, training somebody to fix it, the training cost of that individual is associated with that purchase. And then finally, once that equipment reaches the end of its life, well, we have to get rid of it somehow. Are we just going to throw it out? Or are we going to scrap it? Are we going to sell it on to somebody else? So all of that put together is our total cost of ownership. But we also have our total supply chain costs. So the firm's total costs here. So we have raw materials plus transportation plus a supplier plus transportation plus finished goods assembler plus transportation plus distributor plus transportation plus, and then we have the final retailer. So the total supply chain costs are the sum of all the costs incurred in planning, designing, sourcing, and delivering a product from raw materials to the final customer. So the retailer is paying whatever they're paying for the product, and that cost is incorporated, or actually covers everything before it. So that would be the total landed cost for the retailer. To land it on their dock, that would be the cost. And then the retailer will mark it up some, and that's your cost as a consumer. All right, so we've gone over a lot of different measurements that we can use. And all these measurements are used differently. And knowing when to use them is the key. And like I said, and I know I'm going to say it probably a few more times in these videos, just because you have a hammer doesn't mean everything's a nail. So, while we have total cost of ownership or total supply chain costs, doesn't mean that's the only measure that we use. We might use every single measurement on one thing because it's that critical and we want to make sure it's working. Or we might not even bother measuring it. Depends on what our company values and what they want to measure. Because remember, if it matters, it gets measured. And it's as simple as that.